Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim Dandoeti Tam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvama Shadilaksham Ekam Nityam Bimlamachalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavati Tam Triguna Rahitam Sadgurum Tan Namami Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. We salute the leader of our souls, through whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and delusion and realize the truth in this life. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagatcha Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings in the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the apt and final conclusion of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. A very good morning to all of you gathered here and to our live streaming audience. We are coming to you this time from San Francisco. Last week we were in Hawaii at the ashram there, and we are picking up our past visit teachings about the end of the second chapter of the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. It's a nice long word, but just divided into two. The author, composer, if you might say, of this Upanishad was named Shvetashvatara, a very ancient and revered Rishi. Rishi means a seer of truth. And Upanishad, which of course are the revealed scriptures of India, along with the Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutras, and those three particularly are very important for our recognition, because those are the scriptures that are called Shruti. They must be heard. Shruti means to hear. And then Manana, they must be contemplated, rolled around the mind. Manas is mind. And then finally realized through nididhyasana, through meditation and deep reflection, so that, as we were saying last night at satsang here in San Francisco, one comes to that final conclusion that I just chanted about, that all is Brahman, time, space, living beings, the world, And if you keep this in mind all the time, then you're a candidate for enlightenment. You're on the verge of enlightenment, or you live in enlightenment every day, once you get the mind well grounded in that one thought. And that one thought, as it manifests through all the various darshanas of India, like Samkhya, like Vedanta, Yoga, and Nyaya, the apt reasoning, and also the other darshanas which are called non-orthodox, like Buddhism and Sikhism and Jainism. Those are all very powerful systems to contemplate, which gives the aspirant plenty to do and plenty of time to reflect and plenty to sink the teeth into, as they say, philosophically speaking. And that preoccupation or that penchant is what the Vedantist, of which all of us in the room are forming the bulk of here in this SRV association in San Francisco, is what we do, especially on the weekend at these classes, which are called Gnana Yoga. There's the Karma Yoga, that is the active yoga, which one tries to do selflessly and without a sense of agency or ownership. And then there is the Bhakti Yoga, path of devotion, where one does one's rituals, pujas, chanting, singing to the Lord, and practices the devotional exercises and increases one's love for divine reality. What is divine reality? One person told me once, I don't know what God is, but I love it. So it can be formed, it can be formless, or it can be beyond form and form. Whatever it is pure existence, and it's there in the hearts and minds of all beings. So becoming aware of it in various ways, through action, through devotion, through wisdom, and finally the fourth yoga, through meditation. That tends to distill things. We must sit quiet, all this action, all this activity that's going on, because bhakti is also involving a lot of activity. Jnana that is wisdom yoga, is causing a lot of activity in the mind, lots of thoughts to come up, lots of misconceptions to be destroyed, and lots of new thoughts to be planted there. So in that case, the yogas of action are numerous, but that one yoga of inaction is singular, meditation. So it tends to be the distilling power in all of this. And it's probably one of the main things, you might say, that's wrong with this picture, as we were just saying, that nobody sits still anymore, goes to the forest, reflects quietly, and goes within and takes time, takes it and breathes slowly instead of rapidly, and settles down all the affairs so that the reality that is within, that we just chanted about, can be seen clearly and can be brought into everyday life, so that one's actions are balanced, so that negative karmas get expunged when they rise, and so that one's devotions reach fruition and one's wisdom reaches the highest knowledge. If thine eye be single, you shall know the truth. So that single eye is what is developed through meditation. Sri Ramakrishna used to have the story of churning milk in the old style. You churn milk to get butter, right? But there are some secrets to that. And after you churn it, you have to take the milk bucket and set it in a quiet place so that the curd will rise to the surface out of the churning process. So you can't disturb it, or that process will not happen. And then once it happens, you can take the cream off of the top and mold butter out of it. So that churning process is, you might say, our daily actions, is that karma yoga that's going on. And it churns to the surface positive and negative things. We're bound to come in contact with both of them. So the first we try and forbear the negative things, and the positive things we try and remain equanimous about. So we take everything in stride, as they say. But that churning process of the milk then is like the karma yoga, is the activity. It also can be assigned to that ability of the aspirant to do sadhana. You know, that word sadhana means spiritual practice. And we were talking about it last night over our prasad meal at the dinner table here, as the defining thing between, say, just an intellectual and a practitioner. See, between a person who only knows the lower knowledge of the universe and a person who comes to know the higher wisdom of divine reality, practice is going to be the defining thing. The same in anything, in music or in arts, or the practice of it is very important. Otherwise, you end up to be a pretend musician or a pretend artist or a pretend yogi. And there are many of those around, I can tell you, in my time working with Western consciousness and in spirituality. So that churning process then has to be followed by placing the milk in a quiet place. You know what that infers, I hope. That's meditation. After you do all this action, you must go and sit, because you want to get the essence out of those experiences, right? That's the butter rising to the surface. And it's mixed with the milk. That means Brahman is there and everything, but you haven't done the process yet to distill it out, to see it. It's behind the scenes, and the world of name and form is covering it, as we said last night at satsang. So you're going to have to strip layers off of that gift. It's like you would unwrap a diamond with a bunch of layers. First there's the cardboard, and then there's the wrapping paper, and then there's the little Easter egg stuff. Finally you get to this little box inside, and you open that up, and there's the diamond. So you have to strip the layers off the gift. In other words, the body is one layer, and the prana is another layer, that is life force, and then the mind is a third layer, the intellect is a fourth layer, and the ego is a fifth layer. We call those the five sheaths. That's the Adara system of Vedanta, which we've looked at on charts and in classes previously in the past in SRV. This is our 20th year, so we've seen that system quite a bit, but it's a very precious one, because it tells us that Brahman is none of those. Divine reality is none of those. You are none of those things. You are not body, energy, mind, its thought, or the ego that presides over them. You're a separate sense of existence. You're the all-pervasive Atman. You're that gift that has taken on these coverings. That taking on of coverings is your own business, and you also then must need to slough them off at times to know that you're not those, because if you don't do that practice, pretty soon you become convinced that you are the body, that you are energy, that you are thought, that you are the mind. And that's contrary to the truth that the rishis have discovered, that they're beyond, if you want to put it succinctly, matter, energy, and thought. God is none of those things. Those are activities, and God is without action. God is purely stationary, stable, quiet, peaceful, inactive, static. And you only reach that through meditation. That's the Almighty Father of Christianity. That's the Buddha nature, or Tathagata Garbha of Buddhism. That's the Brahman of Vedanta. That's the Asampragyata of Yoga. And so to reach that, you're going to have to place that churned milk, those experiences of life, in a quiet place and reflect on them. And as you do, the essence will start to rise out of them. The essence, the main essence being, I am Atma Brahma, I am the self in all. And none else exists but that self. These activities are all phenomena. That's why I just chanted. We recognize that one reality is the witness of all changing phenomena. We know it's been there at all times. It's been there through our succession of births and our deaths. It's been there when people proposed that there was a void, but then we ask, well, who was around to see the void and to name the void? There must have been a witness of the void, so the void can't be the ultimate thing, because somebody named it and somebody saw it, somebody conceived of it. So we can't be nihilists. In fact, you should probably annihilate nihilism as soon as you can, and avoid the void. Get on to the fullness. Isn't this all full? Purnamadaham, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamadachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnamadeva, Vashishyate. Purna, 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 Purna. It's all full, full, full. That was the final conclusion of the Vedic rishis, that all of this was full. If you talk about emptiness, you're talking about the emptiness of suffering, the emptiness of evil, the emptiness of objectivity, the emptiness of sensuality, the emptiness of mind, when it does finally get around to sitting itself in a quiet place. You find that it's all empty, and that emptiness is welcome. Because you're not plagued by activities, you're not plagued by various problems that arise in the cosmic process. From cosmic to collective on down to the individual life, all these overlays and problems are there. Impediments, kleshas, viparyayas, are called by different things in different systems. So if one can sit like that after each day's experiences, and probably before they start too, before and after meditation, then one learns the art of extracting the essence out of their experiences. Otherwise, what you see are people just running after experiences all the time and never stopping. And they never get the essence out of it, so at the end of their life they're not fulfilled. Trishna, the Buddhists say, they're all thirsty. They're still thirsty at the end of their lives for the next lifetime. And some of them have already chosen their body before they die. They've already chosen their next body and their next parents. People are divine that way, but they have to be aware of their divinity. When Swamiji says all beings are divine, he is careful to put the word potentially before that. They're all potentially divine. Because the great Mahavakyas say, thou art that, and aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman, and so forth. It's not easy, as we know, to jump to such a station from a dualistic or from a worldly kind of position that we've been adopting so long. So we have to take that precautionary measure of saying all beings are potentially divine. So that means what a marvelous creation you've been responsible for here, this projection, everything that you've done and everything that has been expressed through you. How many marvels are there in human society, and at the same time how many horrors have come about from that creative process. How many imbalances are there, how many diseases and so forth are always plaguing, mental, physical, and every other kind you can think of. So if we're potentially divine, then we have to be very careful of our custodianship of the body-mind mechanism and of action. Very considered, well-considered action that doesn't accrue karma over time. And so one of the arts of that is to contemplate. We just said shruti, hear the truth, and then manana, roll it over in your mind. Sometimes that's called yukti, reason about it. So of a lot of the young people in the room here, I invite them always to ask questions, and we talk about it from the standpoint of not only the Vedanta, but from other religions that we've been raised in and that we come from. All religion being indigenous to our soul. It's not something, all religions aren't alien to us. They're all indigenous to every soul. In fact, in our series of lifetimes, we've probably been adherents of different religions. We've been Muslims, we've been Hindus, we've been Christians, we've been every kind of walk of life you can imagine. We've been different genders. We've had many sons, many daughters, many mothers, many lovers, many husbands, many wives. And in that sweep of cosmic display, the Divine Mother's display, we haven't learned very well to distill the essence of all of those experiences, so we keep wanting to have them again and again. And this is what Lord Buddha said, called the Kala Chakra, the wheel of birth and death. You must get off of that wheel of birth and death by snapping the chains of desire, attachment, and root ignorance. You must come to know yourself. Know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So to hear the truth then is very important, but to sit and reflect on it is the next step. A lot of people hear it. There's that beautiful chant, you see, that Shravanayapi Bahubir Yo Na Labhyaha Shrinvato Pi Bahavo Yam Na Vidyuhu. Some have heard of the Great Self. Others have never heard of it. Others have heard of it but have failed to comprehend it. But very blessed is the one who has heard of it from the lips of an illumined teacher and realizes it in this life. So right there you have sort of 4 different layers, don't you? A person who's heard of it, that's all. And you have a person who's heard of it but failed to comprehend it. Then you've had a whole host of souls who have never heard of it. They have no idea there's something called Atman or Buddha nature or the great self or reality. They have no interest in it either. That's probably why they haven't heard of it, because they haven't awakened yet to their spiritual nature. And then you have those beings who hear about it from the lips of an luminary, and then they realize it in this life. And of course, that's championed by the rishis. That's what you want. So that's sitting, letting the milk sit in a quiet place so that the cream can rise, and then you can gather it easily, you see. And you leave aside the 2%, you see. And you walk away with that essence of life, the essence of all your experiences. So by the time you exit this body, you feel fulfilled. You feel dharmic. You feel like your life has been not meaningless, as so many people say, but full of meaning. That everything is fraught with meaning. Every object, every word, every thought, every god, every goddess, every religion, full of meaning. Purna, 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 full, 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 was how the rishis finally expressed it in one of the great peace chances. He says, what is exterior is full, what is interior is full. The exterior might seem finite, but it's come from the infinite. Since it's come from the infinite, it too is infinite. Have you ever thought of that? That although there are the kingdoms of heaven within you, then here's the kingdom of heaven without, you see, outside of you. But isn't it infinite? Infinite trees, infinite clouds, infinite water, infinite so forth, infinite people. It's all infinite. Just because it has a finite exterior doesn't mean that it isn't infinite. So there's nowhere you can't look that there isn't infinitude, a vast expanse of God or God's expression. This is God with qualities, Saguna Brahman, and this is what we can't see is Nirguna Brahman, God without qualities, or the formless, form and formlessness. And the truth of each of those has been known by the seers. They've known the truth of each. They've studied the external universe and put it in its place, and then they've studied, which hasn't happened yet with Western psychology and Western science and physics and so forth. The seers have always also studied the interior universe, what Christ called the kingdoms of heaven inside. They had to do that by quiet, deep, rapt meditation, sitting still for a long time. And their intention was to find out the nature of that, but what they got instead was bliss. They got peace and bliss. And they said, well, maybe I don't need to know all of this. Maybe I'll just sit in this bliss. You see. And then in that deep peace and deep bliss, greater realizations came. That's the formless Brahman. The formless Brahman suggested itself upon their meditations. So in the deep, dark mountain cave, the yogi meditates on divine reality and shuts his eyes. If he shuts his eyes, there's already darkness, right? But it's just to make sure it's really dark, he goes into a cave so that there's double darkness around him. Why? Because it's so much easier to see the light of Brahman if you're plunged into darkness. So he sets himself up to see that scintillating light of Divine Mother Shakti. You see that dynamic power coming like dharmic rain, you see, down from the formless Brahman through all the worlds, manifesting itself. And that's where we pick up these slokas today that we left off last time in San Francisco. We're a little bit behind the Portlanders because there are 2 weekend classes in Portland and only 1 weekend of classes here. But we have reached the end of chapter 2 in this Upanishad. Shvetashvatara, the great Rishi, and the Upanishad, which is a word that's rather hard to define. It sort of means, they say, upa, ni, shat. You know, it's that knot that you loosen by sitting in the presence of a teacher. The knot of ignorance that gets loosened by sitting in the presence of a teacher in like-minded company, holy company we call it, sadhu satsanga. So Upanishad reflects those great truths that were told by the Upanishads to their disciples and their students that loosened the knot of ignorance that then let them free. So we picked it up at the end of chapter 2. We had just finished this sloka, which is number 15. And where Shvetashvatara says, when the yogin realizes the truth of Brahman through the perception of the truth of Atman in the body as a self-luminous entity, then knowing the divinity as being unborn, eternal and free from all modifications of Prakriti, he is freed from all sin and all transgression. So he comes to know the self-luminous entity existing in the body. And if you remember from the class 2 months ago, I showed you that constitution of the luminary. It's the last chart I showed you. It showed you the luminary with all of his ways of thinking according to these Upanishads, according to these slokas. Now, that means we finished this sloka, but I want to linger a little bit here on this last sentence. Free from all the modifications of Prakriti. So we're talking about this distilling process that happens when you sit in silence. And in yoga, Patanjali gives us the 8 limbs of yoga. Well, I've come up with something here that's I would call the 7 branches of the 7th limb. And it's a 7-fold process that happens right in between meditation and samadhi. As you remember yoga, remember you start out with yamas. There are 5 of them. Non-violence, truthfulness, so forth, and non-coveting and all that. And then you go to the 2nd limb, which is niyamas, which is tapas, austerity, devotion to God, Ishvara Pranidhana, and others. See, there's the Kriya Yoga, for instance, which combines all of that with study of scriptures, Swadhyaya. So that's the 2nd limb. And then the 3rd limb is asana, which I was remarking this morning. Most of you sat pretty still, but a couple of you still haven't mastered your posture yet. Mastering the posture means ekasana. You get into one posture and you can sit for a long time. That's the purpose of yoga, is not to shift about, as many are doing nowadays, but actually just to distill your posture down to one. It's all about oneness, isn't it? So it shouldn't be any different in physical yoga. You're really doing these asanas to get yourself ready for this one sitting posture. And then after that, when you can sit still, you can breathe right. So then pranayama is the 4th limb. You practice the breathing exercises. That's all classic yoga. Patanjala, Raja Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, it's called 8-limbed. The 5th limb is pratyahara, withdrawing your mind from the objects. That is, trying not to think anymore. We've learned in the West, think. That's the instruction for a lazy person, for a lazy mind. Come on, start to think. Your parents would tell you, wake up, get the thinking process going. So you do that, only to find out that later on in spiritual life you want to try and stop thinking now. You've thought enough. You know what it's like, and you know what it produces. Now it's time to still the mind. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha, still the vibrations of the mind. And that's then a very hard step for people to get over, especially in the West. They are thinking about things. Even when they abstain from drinking coffee, then they're still thinking about coffee. So they haven't attained pratyahara yet, the ability to give up everything instantaneously as a matter of their own will. It's a step to freedom, to be free of all attachments and all things. You can come back to them later, only without that attachment. You can enjoy things later. So you renounce things, and you get to that state of peace and equanimity, that you don't think about anything but God, but reality. And then, if you have attained that 5th limb, you get to the 6th limb of concentration. And there, life begins to smooth out. A person who can concentrate in whatever walk of life, whether it be in your daily chores or in your artistic pursuits or in your spiritual practice, anyone who has attained concentration has really achieved the secret of all life. That is, to concentrate puts away everything else, all brooding, all fear, all doubt, even suffering with the body is gone when you can concentrate. I asked Ramakrishna once when he had the cancer in his throat, don't you suffer from that hole in your throat? He said, only when I talk to you. See, then I come down to the body, and then I feel it. But when you go away, my mind will just go back to Mother Kali's feet, and I won't feel this anymore. So let this disassociation of the soul from the body and its pain be called by the name yoga. That's how Krishna puts it in the Gita. Chapter 6, chapter on meditation. So that sixth limb is very key. And then you have the seventh limb, which is meditation. Guess what? If you've been practicing meditation for 10, 20, 30 years, but you never learned how to concentrate, then you really haven't started your meditation practice yet. And there are many people in that bag, as they say. Well, I have a meditation practice for 10 years, but they really never learned to concentrate properly. Concentrate on one thing. That's why they give them the mantra, you see. If you give a student the mantra, then it's like the component that helps you take all the waves of the ocean and put them into one big wave, a tidal wave. So all these little thoughts you're thinking about, you gather them all together and they're all dissolved into this one big wave of the Lord's name. It just sucks everything else up, all other thoughts. So the mantra helps you to become one-pointed. It's one of the great gifts that Hindu philosophy and Eastern philosophy has given to us, the mantra. It's you might say the go-to move for spiritual teachers, especially for us Westerners, because so busy, so dynamic, so not given to silent meditation. See, India has a whole culture of silent meditators, sannyasins, yogis, people who go away and just spend their whole life in meditation. And so it becomes a part of the genes of a culture or a race. It becomes a part of the heredity. It becomes a part of the very makeup of the mind. Samskars, they're called. That in my culture I have this whole host of sannyasins or yogis who have done nothing but practice meditation on God. And then they've come back to tell me about it. So it's a part of my being, you see. But in the West, it's very alien to us. We have a very hard time finding anyone who wants to take sannyas. Even Vivekananda came, and though, as I was saying last night, he convinced thousands of Hindu men to give their life to God. Something that's never happened before, ever, in the history of religion. That you could convince people to give up house and home and take up sannyas. He did that. That was in India. But when he came here, only two he could get to do that, and they both gave up the path after a few years. So they asked him later, what happened there, Swamiji? Swamiji said a seed was planted. A seed was planted. So we have at least two people in our early history here in America that took sannyas, and that's going to burgeon over time. It's going to grow. It's going to spread. In fact, it's spreading right now. Some of these young people sitting here are saying, maybe I won't get married. Maybe I'll live a life of sannyas. Maybe I'll try and follow Swamiji to the hilt, see. Or if I do get married, I'm going to follow him anyway. I'm going to be a dharmic householder and raise my children in love of God, see. Now we need more of those. That's why I'm teaching in the householder realm, see. The monks already have what I'm teaching. So we need to get this into the households, but particularly the Western households, and particularly with the children who are coming now, and they need to be raised in this. A lot of the young children whose parents I started teaching 20 years ago, when SRV was born, are now teenagers, and they were raised on the bhajans that I used to sing, and they were just little tots then. And some of them, I even gave them the mantra back then, pre-initiation mantra, and they used it as they grew up. So now they come to me full grown and ready for Vedantic teachings. But on a very small scale, I must say. It takes a lot to convince a person, what to speak of giving up the world, just to give some of their life to spirituality. It takes a lot to do that. Long time and very few takers. So anyway, all that in accord with this seventh limb meditation is something that you can practice for a long time, but if you haven't learned to concentrate properly, your efforts aren't being fruitful. You're not getting any real definitive butter, as we were saying, out of your meditations. And anyway, if you can meditate, then you can get samadhi. So this is another reason why the West isn't experiencing samadhi, which, by the way, is their true nature, is the deepest experience, most precious to their hearts. Everyone has a memory of being in bliss. Everyone has a memory of being perfect. Everyone has a memory of non-dual samadhi, whether it be after, post-mortem, or whether it be before one got into the body. One has a memory of that kind of bliss, either qualified or absolute. And so it's called Smriti Bedo. You see, we don't have any words for them in English, so you have to go to the Sanskrit. It's a causal memory, a memory of your causal body, like your deep sleep body tonight. You went into deep sleep last night, you had no children, no form, no worries, and you had bliss besides. And you woke up refreshed, even after 20 minutes of deep sleep, whereas 6 hours of dreaming left you ragged, you see. Because this is dream number one here, they say. And when you dream tonight, it's dream number two. And you come back to dream number one, you see. So it's all dreaming. It's all dream life. But deep sleep eradicates that. So it's very close to immersion in Brahman, the fourth, Turiya, fourth state. Waking is one, dreaming is two, deep sleep is three. So we have three levels to our consciousness. We know that. The first one is our gross body. The second one is our subtle body, which is our mind. And the third one is our causal body. So all good Indian children are taught from their first breath, when they can first understand words, that you have three bodies, not one. And guess what? You're none of them. Your consciousness is none of them. Your consciousness is associating with those three bodies, but you're something other, something completely other. You're a fourth. You're non-dual samadhi. So everyone has that as their true nature, and has it also in their subtle memory. Now we just have to dig that up somehow, you see. And that's precisely what you're doing in meditation. You're digging up that causal memory. And when you have an insight or a deep experience of bliss, you have reached that momentarily in meditation. If you've learned to concentrate properly, you can experience it more often. If it just comes kind of randomly, then you know that it's a combination of the gunas being in balance, your own karma entering a neutral state, and having a good day. Have a nice day. Well, for the spiritual aspirant, that having a nice day is, hopefully I can, in my meditation today, I can get khyati. I can get discernment with clarity. So this chart I've put up there is what I call, sort of humorously, the 7 branches of the seventh limb. It's a sevenfold journey to formlessness that happens after a person has attained meditation. And it's a very beautiful teaching, particular to Patanjali's yoga, the way he puts it. But when you look through it, you can see the influence of Buddhism on Patanjali, because Buddha lived probably 600 or 700 years prior to Patanjali. And when Patanjali came along, you can see by some of the wording and by some of the, like samyak, for instance, that word was used in the Ashtanga Marga, the Eightfold Path of Buddha, a lot. And also some of the wordings, luminosity is the self-nature of sattvic Buddhi. That sounds like you're in a Buddhist class all of a sudden. Self-nature, that kind of thing, Buddha nature. So in that regard, what he's trying to map out here for us is a sort of path back to our causal memory. You're trying to dig it up in various ways. Maybe you're not trying to dig it up. Maybe you're just sitting in meditation and saying, whatever, let it happen. So you don't have any really discrimination to your meditation yet. You're just sitting. So you bring a little bit of this wisdom into your meditation. That's why you want to integrate the 4 yogas, right? You want to karma yoga, bhakti yoga, Gnana Yoga. The best fueler for your meditations is Gnana Yoga. That is for this kind of meditation. For bhavas or for devotional ecstasies, the best fuel would be Bhakti Yoga in this. But there are Bhakti Yoga sutras too, like from Narada's sutras. So Krishna says, and he might as well be the god of love as far as we're concerned, he says, Nahi Gyanena Sadrishyam Pavitramiha Vidyate, of all the purifiers in the world, knowledge is the best. Use that. Use that to get khyati, clarity. So if you bring this into your meditations, that is, study the scriptures, talk about it with your guru and with your sangha, and then have that in your mind, and then you go sit in meditation, your mind is naturally concentrated on one thing. It's either on wisdom, or then it's on formlessness in meditation. So you see how thought and non-thought go together, or how form and formlessness go together, and how they complement each other. They're not antagonistic to one another. Jnana and Bhakti, the yoga of knowledge and the yoga of devotion, are not antagonistic of one another. They're the two wings of the bird. A bird can't fly with one wing, you see. Same with action and inaction. That is, karma yoga and meditation yoga, they're complementary of one another. Because you're trying to extract, as I just said, the experiences of your life through meditation. Otherwise, you're just thirsting after experiences, and you're running after them. Oh, guess what I did today? See? Oh, I had another experience. Next. You see? It's just a constant cycle of experiences without any definitive end to it, without any essence. So if you put the yoga of inaction alongside of your yoga of action, and if you put the yoga of knowledge alongside your meditations, then what a very rich spiritual life all of a sudden burgeons up in you. You don't know what boredom is, and I can attest to that at least. I have not been bored ever since I found the Vedanta, not once. And so I had to do something with that non-boredom. So I made 250 charts for you. I mean, I fall back on Vivekananda's beautiful saying that, you can't be in non-dual samadhi all the time. Yeah. Or Ramakrishna saying a bird, flies around all the time, but it has to come to rest on a branch once in a while. So here's my branch, see. Instead of just meditating, like I probably should have been doing, I decided to come back and chart the scriptures for you. These are charts of the various teachings in the scriptures, about to be released in a book called Footfalls of the Indian Rishis. Actually, there were 6 great footfalls, the 6 darshanas, and then there were a host of other footfalls too, like I was saying, Jainism and Sikhism and so forth. And the vibrations of these footfalls are still shaking the earth, as is testament to you all being here and listening to this and having some sort of interest in it. So so far in my experience, it's not been, oh, Babaji's got another chart. So I'd like to see that chart. See? So I know there's interest out there. Never mind, my nickname of Chartananda. The bliss of making charts. I'll get over it. I'll get over it eventually, don't worry. In the meantime, in terms of this sloka here, sloka 15, he says, when the divinity is realized as unborn and free from all modifications of prakriti, the first word you'd think about in yoga, when you say free from all modifications of prakriti, which means all changes of nature. Prakriti is nature, modifications are change. The first word you think about would be this beautiful word koivalya. It's really very particular to yoga too. I first heard it learned with a very old Vedanta teacher on Oahu in Hawaii, Mr. Morosi, was always excerpting quotes from the Koivalya Upanishad, so there's even a scripture named after that word. Koivalya is an interesting word in that it means isolation is probably the best English word to use, isolation. And the implication is, what do you want to isolate yourself from? Nature. It's not going to be a popular concept among certain cross-sections of people today, but nevertheless, you're talking here about seers and saints now. Remember last night I said, when Time magazine put out the articles, God is Dead, you see, on the front of their issue, I looked inside and at the editorial staff and didn't find one seer there. So I put the book down, didn't read it. I don't want to know the opinion of a editorial writer on the subject that God is dead. I want to go to the seers and saints to find out. See? So before you cast out the idea, consider the father of yoga with his many, many lifetimes of rebirth in higher wisdom, and with his many, many thousands of adherents, has told you that there comes a time in your spiritual life where you will isolate yourself from nature. Now, doesn't it sound like causal memory? Like that memory that you have being formless, of being blissful, of being free of worry, and free of transgressions, and free of implications, modifications. You have that in you, and that's your peace. The peace that passes all understanding, Christ called it. You have that in you, and you're only unaware of it because you've covered it over with restlessness or laziness or the various attributes of the mind which are not dharmic, which are not healthy for you. So you can make that connection here, is that Kaivalya, isolation from nature, connects very deeply into that feeling of absolute bliss that's in you. The ego, by the way, is just taking a bit of that bliss from pure nature and making it your happiness. The ego is saying, this is my happiness. I'm getting happiness out of that friend. I'm getting happiness out of that book. I'm getting happiness out of that cup of coffee. Whatever it is, the ego is truncating, selecting just a little bit of that ultimate bliss and applying it to its own uses in accord with objects and relationships and matter, basically. But when that ego gives up, it'll turn to that huge light inside of it and will dissolve there. And that will be your death. And hopefully that death will be conscious at least once. Because if you die one conscious death, then you are free for all times. Whether you come into the body or not, they say, you will be free if you have that experience of what they're calling enlightenment and so forth. Better to have it before death. But it can be had at the time of death. Just talk to the Tibetan Buddhists about that and read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So, Kaivalya, isolation from nature, happens. Now, this first quote of his, let's read that. Through union of the two principles called nature and soul comes the observation of their fundamental difference. Are you following that? That is, when nature and soul get together in their so-called union, then a person who's aware should know, oh, these two are different. The problem will occur when you think that maybe they're the same. But a discriminating person will know that nature's insentient, but my soul is sentient. And also will make the connection eventually that nature has come out of the soul. Now that's a whole different level of realization, that all of this is my own projection. I mean, it's not that hard to see when you think an inventor creates something first in his mind, right? Usually, unless he stumbles on something by accident, so-called accident. Usually an architect will design everything first in his mind, then put it on paper, and then manifest it into the actual woodworking or whatever medium he's using. So it makes sense that everything begins in the mind, even if you look at it that way. So even more so for the spiritual person who's thinking about withdrawing from nature, that all of nature actually happened in the mind first, and then it got manifested. And that's why they have things called the 5 gross elements, air, earth, fire, water, and ether, and then the 5 subtle elements, tangibility, visibility, and odor, and so forth. The 5 subtle elements are different than the 5 gross elements in that they belong to your subtle body, don't they? Your gross body has the 5 elements in it. You're all made up of water and made up of fire and made up of earth and so forth. And air is in you, and ether shoots all the way through you. So in that way, you can see the discriminating process of a person who's trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, as Christ said, or the real from the unreal, or like a swan can, because that secretive element in its saliva can select the cream and leave the water from a bowl of milk. You see? So selecting out the essence and leaving the non-essence, like we were talking about in the churning of the milk analogy. So this modifications of Prakriti, when the soul gets together with nature, the first thing that should happen with an intelligent person is he will see the difference between the two. You can't talk about oneness now. See, that's a green coconut oneness you're thinking about. You know what I mean by that? Sri Ramakrishna's story of the green coconut. When it's unripe, it's all one thing. So that's green coconut oneness. You think everything is one. No. That's not going to apply until you have non-dual samadhi. Then you'll know everything's one. In the meantime, you have to wait for the coconut to ripen, and it turns into 5 layers. The outer husk, the inner husk, the shell, the meat, and the milk, you see. And then there's a kernel rattling around inside, which is the Atman, not connected to the 5 sheaths, but trapped inside of them. So before the coconut is ripe, it's one solid mass, isn't it? I know because my Labrador used to try and tear them apart on the beach in Hawaii, you see. And if the coconut was ripe, he could get to the inner copra and finally the shell. But if it wasn't, it was just one green mass, and he was just end up with copra sticking out of his fangs. So this green coconut oneness is not what you want to be holding. You want to ripen that coconut. I mean, the coconut might as well be this coconut here. Let's get it ripe, right? And that ripeness means, in Vedanta, discrimination between the real and the unreal. So that's what Patanjali is talking about here. When nature and soul come to get into union, then comes the observation of the fundamental difference between one's true essence and nature. The fundamental difference. One is living, one is dead. Nature is dead, you're living. Nature is insentient, you're sentient. Nature is matter, you're spirit. However you want to put that, that's the first step towards Kaivalya, towards accomplishing what Buddha did under the Bo tree by sitting for 40-some days and finally getting himself out of the Kala Chakra and off the chain of rebirth and away from his ancestors and away from the gods and goddesses, transcendent of them, which is his formless nature, Buddha nature. So Kaivalya is there. You can see again how Patanjali, probably very much influenced by Lord Buddha and his nirvana. But thank God to the scrutiny, the scrutinizing nature of the Indian philosopher. Patanjali is going to explain it to us in depth. He's not going to just say, oh, it happens and there it is. Can't explain it. He's not happy with that. He's going to go into depth of how the process works, that a soul separates itself from nature inside the dynamics of spiritual life. It's precious. This is a precious spiritual teaching to all the lovers of the Dharma. And he maps it out in the Yoga Sutras. Let's look at it. Well, I didn't finish the quote. This process takes place when the Purusha, the soul, abandons its relationship with matter and mixes itself no more with nature. This is called Kaivalya, final isolation from the endless stream of phenomena caused by mind and intellect. So he's saying many things at once there. The mind and intellect is what's caused nature. First you can draw that penultimate conclusion. And then you could also say there is separation, there is isolation, there is freedom. Buddha's first noble truth was there is suffering. And he ends up with there is release from suffering via the Eightfold Path. So, Ashtanga Marga, the Eightfold Path of Buddha, begins to look like the 8 limbs of yoga, doesn't it? 650 years apart. People have been waiting for Christ to come for 2,000 years, but he's already come 4 or 5 times. Do you think he's going to come back in a robe and a beard just for Middle Eastern people? No, times change. He knows that. He's the king of change. He's transcended all change. So the same with Patanjali and Buddha. If you're calling one a Buddhist and the other a yogi, and somehow those names are separating the two, then you're up a creek without a paddle, philosophically speaking. You don't know that all these seers know what Kaivalya is. They know what isolation from nature is because they've accomplished it. And when they accomplished it, they saw their identity with each other. And all of them salute Lord Kapila, you see, the Samkhya yogi who first gave us the 24 cosmic principles so that we could separate ourselves from them. 5 elements, 5 subtle elements, 5 gross senses, 5 subtle senses, and a 4-fold mind. That's basically what's here. 24 cosmic principles. 4-fold mind is thought, mind, ego, and intelligence. So when he gave us that gift, then everyone went, marvelous, somebody did their homework. Now we know what we're not. They say in Vedantic circles, especially Advaitic circles, who am I, who am I, who am I, they go around repeating, see, and they think they're so cool. See. But in order to know who you are, you have to know what you're not. And that's where cosmology and philosophy comes in. If you say, I don't need words, I don't need books, I don't need the experience of the seers, then you have a green coconut oneness going on that's going to be very hard to ripen. But if you follow the footsteps of the rishis, if you look at Lord Kapila's original Samkhya Yoga, then you've got this beautiful cosmological layout, a trail of breadcrumbs that leads you back lifetime to lifetime to your true essence. All you need to do is follow it. You can follow it through 8 limbs, you can follow it through the Eightfold Path, you can follow it through any system of India, because Kapila did his homework at one time, you see. So, that's my cosmic joke, right? Lord Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, they all walked into a room. This is called 3 guys enter a Gyanakasha. So they all walked into the Gyanakasha, the realm of knowledge where the seers hang out, you see. And they ran into Lord Kapila, and they all saluted him and said, "Thank you very much." Thank you very much. You see. Because all of those systems are built off of Lord Kapila's original system, Samkhya Yoga. And they took it further, no doubt, but doesn't mean Lord Kapila didn't know about what was further beyond that. He wasn't trying to impress you with what he knew. He was trying to give you a layout of your gross and subtle and cosmic causal bodies, so that you know how to isolate yourself from them. Who would have thunk? I think you go running to things that change and embrace them. Look where it's gotten you. But what if you had embraced the absolute? What if you eschewed everything that changed and only went towards the unchanging? If you discriminated away the non-essence and only took the essence, wouldn't you be more like, say, Sri Ramakrishna now? So this is just a little bit of commentary on this first sloka of Patanjali's. In fact, Vedavyas, his commentary on, Vedavyas is the father of Vedanta, his commentary on the father of yoga's slokas are world-renowned, that the father of one great system looked at another great system and said, marvelous, I'm going to comment on that. Just shows you the universal nature of Indian thinking, of the Vedic rishis. They're not saying my system's better than your system. My father can beat your father up, you see. Not like little kids, see. They're saying, wow, that's a great way of looking at it. Let's just take that in and comment on it from what I know. So this is Vedavyas, the father of Vedanta, commenting on another father's system, father of yoga. Now let's look, I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on this chart, but remember we're talking about isolating ourselves from the modifications of Prakriti, getting ourselves free of nature. Doesn't mean that nature's bad or nature's horrible or any of that. It means that nature has 6 transformations: birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. And those things we're going to have to suffer if we come into the body. Nobody escapes them. Sometimes the yogis can escape them by only living 39 years old, and they only get away from old age. But who else would want to? They all think, oh, I want a nice long life, you see. I want to eat sumptuous foods on gold plates with my grandchildren. One sentence gives them everything, you see. So these seers have experienced then Kaivalya, and it's been a penultimate state. He calls Kaivalya just penultimate to a sampragyata. That's the highest samadhi in yoga. It means seedless. It means you've burnt away all the seeds that are going to bring you back again to another body. You know, like paddy, rice seed. If you heat it for just a second over the fire and strew it, it will not germinate. But if you don't heat it over the fire and spread it, come back after the rainy season and you've got a riot of growth. Those rice seeds are your future bodies, and the fire is the fire of knowledge. So if you just heat those potential seeds over the fire of knowledge, you will not be born again, unless it's of your own choice in consciousness. You will not be born in ignorance ever again. So that's what Kaivalya is. You see, it's penultimate to a seedless samadhi. And before that happens, there are seeded samadhis that happen to you. The samadhi of the ego, the samadhi of bliss, the samadhi of wisdom, the samadhi of knowledge, the samadhi of emptiness. These are all penultimate samadhis to this ultimate seedless samadhi, because they're all with form, and that one singular samadhi is formless. It's even free of the dynamic Shakti properties, that one seedless samadhi. There's a story about that Divine Mother herself tells to her father. Her father is King Himalaya, king of the snow mountains, and he is Divine Mother born to him, Uma, Parvati she's called. And he realizes this is Divine Mother of the universe that's been born to him, sort of like Sharda, and they realized that Divine Mother had been born in her. So she begins to grow up, and as she grows up, he says, give me a darshan with Hanuman. So she says, sure, Father, and she held out her hand and touches him, and he gets a vision of Hanuman, you see. And he has talks with Hanuman, has darshan with Hanuman, so happy. Then, next day, well, you know, I'd really like to see Krishna, and Ram, and Shiva, and so forth. So she begins to give him all these visions of all these great beings. And he has these visions inside of him and just enjoys so much, you see. And finally he looks at her one day and says, can you give me a vision of the formless Brahman? Sorry, Father. In order to have that, you must frequent the company of holy men. You cannot get that. It's a formless samadhi. It's a sampragyata. It's seedless. In fact, when you get that, you probably won't come back anymore to the body. So that's how precious and specific this singular, unseated samadhi is. Buddha called it nirvana. Vedanta calls it nirvikalpa, means beyond time. All cycles of time made extinct, nirvikalpa. And Father Yoga calls it a sampragyata. Zen Buddhism calls it satori. So it's this one formless samadhi that's unique unto itself. And so he says, he Avars and other beings with him that were realized souls, says you need Kaivalya first. As long as you're at all attached to the forms of nature, then you cannot get seedless samadhi. You can have seated samadhi. Even there your intelligence is going to have to be very refined to get bliss, to transcend the ego, to see all knowledge within you. Those are kinds of samadhis that you can have that are with form. But this one is very difficult of attainment. So this is what he's talking about, this 7-branch march in the 7th limb of meditation, leading you to sampragyata. Let's look at them real quick. Samyak jnana, you're going to need wisdom transmission. Only those intelligence which are filled with discriminating wisdom that springs from constantly trying to perceive the spiritual self possess that highest dispassion. So you're going to have to be at it all the time. You're going to have to be on vigil. Find a good teacher and get the transmission. Isn't that what we were talking about last night? Find a good teacher and then hear the truth and then roll it over in your mind. And this will take you some years. So you ought to be able to sit on this egg like a mother bird sits on her egg without moving for a long time, and with patience, until there's some sign inside that something's hatching. It starts pecking from the inside. The mother bird gets off and looks. It's trying to get out. Maybe I'll help it. And she starts pecking. So when that you sit long enough on that wisdom to distill it, then it begins to have a hatching process of its own. See? So this is what he wants. He wants you, as we just said with the churning milk analogy, he wants you to hear the truth and meditate on it for decades. It may be through the course of your life or your lives, right, Satkama? That you're meditating on this wisdom without knowing it. Better for you if you meditate on it by knowing it. But people also come about some knowledge, some discrimination process of it by suffering. Suffering the ignoble whips of pain, the chastising experiences of everyday life, then that also helps distill some of this wisdom, and eventually you will come to some realization of that. So, but better to do it consciously when you first hear it. That's the lesson learned. Now, then you get khyati. Khyati is a precious word along with koivalya that means discernment and clarity. You finally get some clarity. It sort of reminds me of the story of Ramakrishna where he said the painter, and if you're an artist you know this maybe, is you dip your paintbrush in this jar of water to wash it before pretty soon you've used so much paint that the jar of water has all the paints mixed in it. It's kind of a muddy brown. But if you have a piece of alum and you put that in there, it'll clear up immediately like magic. So Ramakrishna saw that happening and he said, my God, that's just like khyati. If you put those grains of that alum of wisdom inside the ignorant mind, it'll clear up right away. Just like that. All the paints of all those different experiences you've been painting on the canvas of your life, all mixed together in a big jar, you see, or a muddy admixture, you see. All you need is a little drop of the alum of clarity, khyati, and drop it in there, and it's clear again. Again, that happens to people by accident, as it were, sometimes. You get moments of clarity. Sri Ramakrishna said the big clock in Calcutta when he was living had gears, and it was made of glass, and it was 2 stories tall or something. So it was all gears moving. But one day out of 365 days, if you were there, it lined up and you could see through the clock. So, he wasn't running around saying, oh, everyone go see that clock. He was saying, you know what that means? It means that every once in a while, even the ignorant mind experiences clarity. That might be 1 year out of your 80 years of life, you had a really good year. You say, have a good day, but what about have a good year? You see, have a good spiritual year. So that clarity comes to them, but again, better to work on it, he says. That one whose intellect is filled with discriminating wisdom that springs from constantly trying to perceive the self, he has discriminating wisdom, which is here, discernment and clarity. So he says, the highest type of dispassion is clarity of knowledge. Because if you know a thing, you're free from fear of it. You've mastered it. If you don't know a thing, it always gives you fear. Think about it, any little thing. An incident in your life, a pet, you see, your own mind, a relative, a strange kid who all of a sudden takes a machine gun to school. You never know what's going to happen, you see. So you don't know the thing, the person, the thought, the tendency, or the form, and it gives you fear. But when you know it and master it, you have no more fear anymore. You transcend it. So that's mastery, knowledge. And so he says, the highest type of dispassion is clarity of knowledge. Called prasad. We usually think of prasad as food. But yes, what about your wisdom food? I'm feeding you right now. Are you eating? And will you digest what I'm saying? Those are my questions to you. There's no doubt I'm feeding you. You can't go most places in the world and hear what I'm saying right now. It would be very hard put to try and find this wisdom being told to you in very many places. You have to look very hard. So you're being fed right now the wisdom transmission, samyak jnana. Now, can you take it in and roll it over in your mind, and can you digest it and show me the results when I come back in 2 months, or maybe tomorrow, or at satsang one night? See, so this is why the yogi eliminates suffering and attains everything, and also, he says, snaps the chain of rebirth. See? Snaps the chain of rebirth. He's free, so he's seen all his lifetimes, and now he doesn't fear anymore. I saw everything I did and who I thought I was. Now I know who I am, not who I thought I was. And now I can take births if I want, or not. I can remain floating in the Divine Mother's womb. See? Floating in the Divine Mother's womb, we're all contemplatives. But we begin to eat poison instead of nectar the minute we're born. The minute we take form. We're consuming earth instead of nectar. So that prasad is nectar, see, to the mind. And so that's the wisdom prasad. Let's take one more and then take a break. And in fact, we probably better take the break now for our live stream audience. We'll be back in 15 minutes, and we can show you this chart on your screen as we take our break. So everyone, breathe, liquefy, come back ready for the second half.
And for our live stream audience, we're going to have to go off the air for a minute, but we'll be right back and show the chart.
So stay with us for a while we fix any technical difficulties we're experiencing. Thank you so much.